Wisdom, like the learning capacity of the human brain, is infinite. There will always be more to know, and there will always be plenty of room in your brain for everything you learn. Life is a paradise, really, if you're a person who genuinely wants wisdom. We all want to be successful, and I'm certainly in favor of that, but I've known some people who literally wanted all the money they could get. Not what the money could buy, but the money itself. Wanting all the money in the world is like wanting to know all there is to know in the world. Except the man who wants all the money is miserable. He'll never get it all, and he'll never think he has enough. Even if he had rooms filled with $1,000 bills, he'd still want the next man's nickel. And he'd be in pain about that, filled with envy about it. The man who wants wisdom also wants to look back over his shoulder at the other guy, but he just wants to see what the other guy is reading. And if the other guy is reading a book he hasn't read yet, he's actually happy about it. He looks forward to reading it himself. The acquisition of wisdom is not what all the mathematicians call a zero-sum game. You don't have to give up something in order for me to have it. You can give me your wisdom and now I'll have it, but you still have it too. When one person shares wisdom with another, neither person is diminished. In fact, both are made wiser. Giving and taking is such a basic experience for most of us, but the whole concept of giving and taking doesn't really apply to wisdom. There's no giving and taking, there's only sharing. Unlike the other things people hunger for, wisdom is very hard to visualize. We could imagine rooms full of money, but how can you picture a room full of wisdom? Books aren't wisdom. They're just pieces of paper bound together. Books can help create wisdom in people's mind, but if you look inside their heads, you won't find any wisdom there. So what is it anyway? To most people, wisdom seems like something in a distant country, as if it were on a tropical island somewhere. Few people, if any, have ever seen it, but it's something that everybody's heard reports about. But almost everybody believes wisdom exists, even if they've never seen it. In that sense, wisdom is almost like God, except it isn't a divine quality, it's a human quality, a very rare, very precious human quality. Ask anybody and they will probably tell you that there is such a thing as wisdom. Furthermore, that person will also tell you that he or she hopes someday to become wise. Ask the same person how to become wise, how to get wisdom, and if that person has some wisdom in him, he probably will just smile or nod or tell you to live and look around you and think about what you see and hear. There was once a man who was a great investment banker, one of the foremost in the world in his profession. He was born in poverty in Europe, was completely self-taught, and had used brains and guts to make a tremendous fortune. Many listened in fascination to this man telling the story of his life, and then would say, "Sir, you should write a book that would sum up all you've learned about the world and about how to succeed in it." But this great international investment banker just looked and smiled. He said, "Well, I suppose I could do that. But it wouldn't really be much of a book. In fact, I could tell you everything I know in just 15 or 20 minutes. Everything I've come to understand over the course of a lifetime. But what good would it do? These aren't things you can just hear about from someone else or read in a book. Until you've discovered them for yourself, they're just words. You've got to live in order to learn what I've learned. You've got to arrive at these truths the way you arrive at your destination after a long journey, with that same sense of fulfillment and joy." It's ironic, isn't it? Wisdom is not a thing you can buy, or a course you can take in school, or a degree you can earn. Yet every parent wants his children to attend good schools, and rightfully so. Wisdom is not really something you can get from another person, yet you can gain some wisdom from everyone you meet. Wisdom is something a wise man always feels he needs more of. Yet the true sources of wisdom lie nowhere but within ourselves. There are plenty of people who are too smart for their own good, people who are filled to overflowing with facts and technical knowledge, but who are sadly lacking in human understanding and common sense. We've all met people like that. They haven't even thought about. I've seen people who have everything you could possibly want, every object you could dream of, everything you can drive down the street or sail on the ocean or fly through the air. But on the inside, where the real person lives, they're broke. They haven't got anything. They haven't got a clue. The Bible tells us that King Solomon was the wisest man in the whole world. But he was not only the wisest, he was also the richest man in the world. Kings and queens came from all over the world to get Solomon's advice and to admire his riches. In fact, legend has it that Solomon had wives from every nation on earth. And there's no report of any marital disharmony. Not one divorce. Was this a wise man or what? The Bible tells us that when Solomon was just a young man living in the court of King David his father, God told him he would grant him one wish. You know what he wished for? He didn't wish for a kingdom. He didn't wish for great power. He didn't wish for good looks or unlimited pleasure or long life or love or fame or security. Solomon asked God to grant him wisdom. And because he asked for wisdom and none of the other things, God gave him everything else too. The most important difference between you and me and Solomon isn't where or when we were born, or the privileges we have or don't. The difference isn't in our names or our bank accounts, or the positions we hold in life. The difference is Solomon got wisdom by asking God for it. The rest of us must look around us for wisdom, and look for it in everything we read and in everything we do and in everyone we meet. And most of all, we must look for it in ourselves, perhaps more than any other element of strong character. Wisdom is a quality that we must earn and learn on our own. The wisest man in ancient Greece, the greatest philosopher the world has ever known, was a man named Socrates. In fact, Socrates made wisdom his profession. Philosopher means lover of wisdom in ancient Greek. And because he didn't have another job, people were always asking Socrates, "So what do you do for a living?" He was definitely smart enough to figure out that he had to have an answer, so he made up his own job title, philosopher. But when people asked Socrates, "What is wisdom?" he always gave the same answer, "I don't know." In fact, Socrates never claimed to know much of anything, except how to ask questions. And by asking questions, he would prove to other people that they didn't know what they thought they knew or were certain of. Everybody in Greece agreed that Socrates was the wisest man in Greece. But unlike King Solomon, the philosopher Socrates didn't have great wealth. The wisest man in Greece was poor. King Solomon managed to run a huge household with many wives and homes and lots of children, and he accomplished this without any discord or unhappiness. But Socrates had no home life at all. The wisest man in Greece was married to a famous and terrible nag, and they had no children. Socrates, the wisest man in Greece, just went to the marketplace every day and hung around and asked people questions and hoped to get invited to a banquet so he wouldn't have to go home and face his wife. King Solomon was honored by all the great leaders of his time, But Socrates, the wisest man in Greece, didn't even have any support among the powerful people in his own country. Their sons would go to Socrates and learn what they could from the philosopher, but the powerful families of Athens, the Greek city where Socrates lived, got tired of Socrates' questions. They grew exasperated with the way he was teaching the youth of Greece that nobody knows anything for sure. So they accused the wisest man in Greece of corrupting their children. Instead of honoring the greatest philosopher who ever lived, the Athenians sentenced Socrates to death, unless he would take back what he taught, unless he would apologize. But Socrates didn't take it back. He didn't apologize. Socrates cheerfully drank down a cup of poison and just sat there calmly saying goodbye to his few faithful students, asking questions the whole time. Solomon and Socrates, two very wise men, but two very different destinies. Great wisdom is no guarantee of anything, but to those who really care about it, wisdom is its own reward. Socrates could have avoided prosecution as a criminal if he had just admitted he was wrong. And you could make a case that agreeing to be executed when you could avoid it by just saying a few words is not very wise, perhaps not even smart. And you'd be right if it were you or me in that position. But it was the right thing to do for Socrates, because Socrates really knew who he was, and he knew that what gave his life meaning and made it worth living was just this manner he had of asking questions and trying to answer them honestly. Socrates knew who he was and what his life meant, and he understood that even one bit of lip service in his last moments would undo all the good and meaningful questions he'd poisoned, and his character was strong enough so that he was actually able to do it. Part of wisdom is knowing what you lack and looking for it and asking for it. Another part of wisdom is knowing, at the same time as you ask, that there are no final answers. There are always more questions. There are always more things and people you don't now know and haven't yet heard of or seen. So you may have that retirement package. You may have the medical benefits, the pension, the Sunbelt home, and a steady income you can live on. What good is it if you're isolated? And I don't mean just physically alone. I mean isolated from a real sense of connection with what's come before and with what lies ahead. It's here that wisdom provides very real, very practical benefits. It's wisdom that provides a sense of life's value and assurance that all the effort has been worthwhile.